We are back with five people who died during sex and 100 other terribly tasteless lists. And we are reading chapter 5 today. Thank you for joining us, for all who are watching. And before we get started, please do try to um, at least subscribe. It's free, and you don't have to do anything else. Um, it helps me out a lot. And if you want to like and comment, so be it. I'm not asking for anything else. But if you like the content, at least consider subscribing. Thank you very much. A hard axe to follow. 10 famous executioners. Chief executioners of Constantinople, excuse me, during the Ottoman Empire excelled in diverse methods of dispatching their victims, including drowning by slow degrees and forcing their victim to imbue ground glass. The most active of them all, Sophilka, the executioner during the reign of Muhammad IV, preferred simple strangulation. He personally throttled about 5,000 people over a period of 5 years. The Duke of Alva, the chief executioner of King Philip of Spain, was hired for his efficiency in wiping out heretics during the Holy Inquisition. His chosen method of execution was to seal the victim's mouth with an iron gag that allowed only the tongue to protrude, then brand the tongue with a hot iron so it became swollen and could not be withdrawn. The victim was eventually burned alive. At Antwerp, the Duke executed 8,000 people in one session. King Philip passed, and the most ambitious descendants of all time. The King Philip passed the most ambitious descendants of all time in 1568 when he declared that the entire population of the Netherlands, approximately 3 million people, was heretical and therefore should be executed. It was a tough nut to crack even for the Duke of Alva, although he did manage to kill 800 people during Holy Week. Richard Brandon, son of Chief Executioner Gregory Brandon, was destined to become England's most famous executioner. Known in the trade as young Gregory, the boy put in hours of practice on his axe technique by decapitating cats, dogs, and boasted he never needed more than one blow of an axe to remove a victim's head. The climax of this distinguished career was the removal of King Charles I's head on January 13, 1649. Although on that day Brandon was a reluctant executioner, he and his assistant insisted on wearing masks and false beards to avoid any possible repercussions. The innovative 19th century English executioner William Marwood invented the modern method of hanging. Until Marwood's day, hanging usually involved a very short drop and slow strangulation at the end of the rope. The executioner often had to weigh the victim by wrapping himself around his legs. Recoveries from hangings were commonplace. In 1871, Marwood perfected the long drop, a system that caused the victim to fall from 6 to 10 feet through a trap door. The drop fractured the neck's vertebrae, severing the spinal cord and medulla, and so causing instant death and reducing the suffering of those hanged. Marwood didn't always get it right. The long drop often resulted in accidental decapitation. London's 18th century chief executioner, John Thrift, was considered the most incompetent man to ever have held the position. Thrift, a convicted murderer who was set free on one condition that he did the government's dirty work as an axeman, was unsuited to the job. He was highly strung, unsure with the axe, and liable to burst into tears at inappropriate moments. His biggest problem was that he couldn't stand the sight of blood. when he was called upon to execute the Jacobite rebel Lord Balmerino at the Tower of London in 1745, he fainted, then lay on the ground sobbing while onlookers tried to persuade him to get on with it. When Thrift finally picked up his axe, he took 5 blows to sever Baltramino's head. Thrift never quite got the hang of it, yet he somehow managed to blunder and hack his way through a 17-year career. He was hated by the public for his clumsiness, and when he died in 1752, a mob pelted his coffin and his pallbearers with stones and dead cats. Best known executioner of the French Revolution was Charles Henry Sanson, the most competent member of the extraordinary family that served the nation with 6 generations of public executioners from 1635 to 1889. Sanson became so adept at his job thanks to endless practice on the necks of French aristocrats that he was able to dispatch 12 victims in 13 minutes. At the height of the Reign of Terror, he removed the heads of 300 men and women in 3 days. His guillotine in the Place de la Révolution was so busy that residents in a nearby street complained that the stench of blood from the stones was a health hazard and lowered the value of their houses. On October 16, 1793, 200,000 people turned out to watch Marie Antoinette lose her head. They were all kept waiting while Henry Sanson untied her hand so she could empty her bowels in a corner behind a wall before her head was cut off. Italy's most celebrated executioner, Mastro Tita, plied his trade on behalf of the Pope, carrying out 516 public executions from 1796 to 1864. Known for his casual scaffold manner, Tita would occasionally offer a condemned person a pinch of snuff just before removing his or her head. His work clothes, still stained with the blood of his last job, carried out when he was 85, are on display at a Rome Museum of Criminology. Australian hangmen bore the official title executioner and flagellator. They were also required to carry out whippings. Elijah Upjohn, who hanged Ned Kelly, was the country's most famous. Like most Australian hangmen, Upjohn was also a convicted felon, originally arrested for drunkenness, indecent exposure, and defecating in a main street, and unnatural practices with a chicken. Fortunately for Kelly, his hanging was one of the few that Upton got right. While he was usually drunk. It was still a very unpopular execution, and afterwards Upjohn got harassed by the public, lost his nerve, and was fired by the government. Grover Cleveland, the only American president to serve 2 non-consecutive terms, personally carried out the execution. Well, this was before President Trump, but he was the first. Personally carried out the execution of 2 criminals. As sheriff in Buffalo, New York in 1872, he hanged 28-year-old Patrick Murciari, who had been convicted of stabbing his mother to death while drunk. 6 months later, he hanged 29-year-old murderer Jack Gaffney. When Cleveland ran for the presidency in 1884, his rivals called him the Buffalo Hangman, but it didn't harm his candidacy. Edwin T. Davis was the world's first official state electrocutioner. An electrician by trade, Davis supplemented his income by sending 240 people to their deaths in 1890 to 1914, serving the states of New York, New Jersey, and Massachusetts. Traveling from prison to prison in his trademark black felt hat, he was the designer of the electric chair, helped make many refinements to the system during his career, and held patents on some of the equipment. Before every execution, he tested the apparatus on chunks of beef, Attaching sponge pads to the meat, inserting wires, and switching the current. As soon as the meat began to cook, he knew the chair was in full working order. 10. Capital oddities. America executed its last witch in 1692, while Poland was still executing witches over 100 years later in 1793. Rules for extracting confessions during the Holy Inquisition were spelled out in the Book of Death, which was on display at in the Casa Santa in Rome until the 19th century. There is no record of a single Holy Inquisition acquittal. The accused were rarely told, nor were they ever allowed to ask what they had been charged with, and were not permitted a defense counsel or allowed to call in witnesses. The authorized method of execution during the reign of the Roman Emperor Tiberius was strangulation. The law forbid that the strangling of virgins. The resourceful Tiberius found a loophole. He ordered that virgins should first be defiled by the executioner. In 2005, a neurologist, Dr. Harold Hillman, published his research into the pain caused by various methods of capital punishment. Dr. Hillman described the executioner's technique and the effects upon the victim, tabulating the symptoms of pain showed by them. He concluded that death by stoning is the slowest and therefore probably the most painful way to die. In the Indian state of Baroda in the 19th century, the Maharaja executed criminals by having elephants step on their heads. On October 9th, 1789, during the meeting of the French Legislative Assembly, Joseph Ignace Guillotin, a former professor of anatomy in the medical faculty of the Paris University, proposed the death penalty should be the same for all social classes, and that in all cases some sort of beheading machine should be used. Dr. Guillotin made no further contribution to the development that bore his name. The guillotine, finished in its finished form, was an invention of Dr. Antoine Louis, the secretary of the Academy of Surgery in France, and initially the device was to be called the Louison or the Louisette after Dr. Louis, but the name never quite stuck. Nor was the guillotine entirely original. A large wooden structure known as the Halifax gibbet had been removing heads in England most Saturday afternoons since the 13th century. It was only one of 100 similar devices. Two men have survived 3 hangings apiece. The murderer Joseph Samuels was reprieved in 1803 after the rope broke twice on the first and second attempts, and the trapdoor failed to open on the third. The trapdoor mechanism also saved the life of convicted murderer John Lee in 1884. Although it worked every time it was tested, it failed to open 3 times in the space of 7 minutes. Lee was let off with life imprisonment. Germany retained decapitations by axe as a method of state execution until 1938. 2 of the last famous executions by axe were those of Baroness Benita von Falkian and Renee von Natzier, who were accused of spying and lost their heads in Berlin Plötzensee prison on February 18, 1935. The electric chair was first used as the modern and humane alternative to hanging after a 40-year-old murderess, Roxanne Drews, took 15 minutes to strangle to death in 1887. 3 years later, Williams Kimmler, convicted of the murder of his lover, Tilly Ziegler, became the first man to die by the new method. After 8 minutes, Kimmler started smoking, and a second burst of power was required to finish him off. The New York Times reported Kimmler was literally roasted to death. The electric chair is still unpredictable. During the execution of Pedro Medina in Florida's Old Sparky on March 27, 1997. A witness saw a foot-long blue and orange flame shoot from Medina's head. Thomas Edison, the inventor of the light bulb and the phonograph, pioneered his own version of the electric chair. In 1890, desperate to convince the people that the alternating current was advocated by his rival George Westinghouse was unsafe, Edison toured America using AC power to electrocute cats, dogs, horses, and elephants as a process Edison called Westinghousing. Funny. Uh, 10 most dubious legal defenses in criminal law court. In 1993, Diana Smith, 37, from Kenzie, Alabama, was found guilty of tampering with a man's grave. The court heard that in 1990, Smith had been charged with causing the death of a man whose grave she had interfered with. She said she was only digging up the casket in order to prove he was faking it. In 2004, Thupten Dargel, a 53-year-old Tibetan health care worker employed in a Wisconsin medical center, was charged with first-degree sexual assault on a woman. He explained that his semen could be found on her clothing because he ejaculated every time he sneezed. Dargel said that he was surprised that his semen hadn't shown up on many other patients. In 1964, Mexican sisters Delfina and Maria de Jesus Gonzalez were arrested when police found the remains of at least 80 bodies on the premise of their brothel in Guanajuato. The Deadly Sisters recruited prostitutes through help wanted ads and killed them when they outlived their usefulness. When asked for an explanation for the deaths, one of the sisters volunteered the food didn't agree with them. In 1994, a court in West Virginia dropped the charges of rape and sodomy against the 45-year-old schizophrenic after accepting evidence that one of the victims' multiple personalities had consented to have sex with one of the rapist's multiple personalities. The prosecution had heard that the two previously met in a group therapy and that many of their different selves had fallen in love and even talked of marriage. Wow, that's kind of shafted. In 2004, a Canadian, Angel Jones, 27, was convicted of aggravated assault against his girlfriend. When he bit off most of her nose during an argument, Jones admitted that the nose was in his mouth but claimed that his girlfriend was on a special weight loss program, that he had caused her nose to become so brittle that it had just fallen off. 33-year-old Frederick Trish was one of 3 men detained for terrorizing the Great Lakes area in a series of spree killings during the summer of 1994. Trish explained later that the 2 we killed, the 2 we wounded, the women we pistol whipped, and the light bulbs we stuck in people's mouth, we didn't really hurt anybody. Seattle death row inmate and convicted murderer Mitchell Rupee, who weighed 70 pounds, appealed against the sentence because he was literally too fat to hang. According to his lawyers, not only would his hanging constitute cruel and unusual punishment, the rope might be decapitated by the pressure of his weight on the rope, risking injury or worse on onlookers. The appeal failed, and Roop swung on July 11th, 1994. In 1996, in Providence, Rhode Island, St. Anthony Laurent admitted to taking part in organized crime. Upon receiving a 10-month prison sentence, he informed the court that he was really innocent, that he had entered a guilty plea only because of the illness that required 40 or 50 enemas a day would have made it difficult for him to sit through a very long trial. In 1996, the U.S. Supreme Court rejected the appeal of the convicted Arizona drug user who claimed he did not receive a fair trial because there were no fat people on the jury. In 2004, Joshua Baldwin, 24, was found guilty of 16 incidents of indecent exposure to women in shopping malls in downtown Bay City, Michigan. Baldwin told the judge, "I was only hoping to get lucky, but I went about it the wrong way." 12 original observations made by condemned men. At least I'll get some high-class education. Murderer John W. Deering facing firing squad after willing his body to the University of Utah. Pretty soon you're going to see a baked apple. George Apple, murderer of puns in New York and a New York policeman as he was trapped in the electric chair in 1928. Will the gas bother my asthma? Louis Jose Monge, awaiting death by gassing for murders of his wife and 3 children at Colorado State Prison in 1967. Warden, I would like a little bicarb because I'm afraid I'm going to get gas in my stomach right now. Charles de la Roy, sentenced to death by lethal gas in 1946 in California for the murder of a fellow prison inmate, bidding for the George Apple Worst Death Chamber Pun Award of 1946. How about this for a headline for tomorrow's paper? French fries. James French, electrocuted in Oklahoma in 1966. Also bidding for the George Apple Worst Death Chamber Pun Award of 1966. Just our luck. We haven't even got a decent day for it. Frank Negran to his fellow murderer, Alex Carrion, as they awaited execution at Sing Sing in 1933. Are you sure this thing is safe? The English poisoner Dr. William Palmer, as he was escorted to the gallows trapdoor in 1855 after killing 14 people. I'd like to thank my family for loving me and taking care of me. The rest of the world can kiss my ass. Robert Alton Harris, gassed, April 21st, 1992. I think I'd rather be fishing. Jimmy Glass, electrocuted June 12th, 1987. I'm still awake. Robin Leroy Parks, after his lethal injection on March 10th, 1992. You might make that a double. British murderer Neville Heath gratefully accepting the offer of a last drink before being hanged in 1946. I did not get my SpaghettiOs. I got spaghetti. I want the press to know this. Thomas J. Grasso, unimpressed by his room service before being executed by lethal injection for his role in the murder of an elderly Tulsa woman in March 1995. And 10 questionable murder motives as the last act of a desperate man. In 1800, the sensitive Russian Tsar Paul, who is both snubbed, nosed, and bald, has a soldier scourged to death for referring to him as Baldy. The Tsar later has the words snub-nosed and bald banned, so that his subjects used them on the pain of death. In 1968, frustrated rock musician Charles Manson finds hidden messages in the Beatles album. The Beatles, popularly known as the White Album, especially the tracks Helter Skelter, Pickies, and Revolution Number 9, which convince him that the apocalypse is at hand. Earth-Wind producer Terry Mickler fails to turn up to hear his songs. Manson and his family decide to pay Melker a visit. Failing to find him at home, they instead brutally murder actress Sharon Tate and four others. In 1977, self-styled emperor of the Central African Republic, Jean Bidal Bokassa, has 200 school children beaten to death by his imperial guard. Their crime is a failure to comply with school uniform regulations. In 1979, two Brazilians, Walter de Souza and Maria de Conceição, confessed to the murder of 6 children in Cantaligo, including a 2-year-old boy. They say that the killings were ritual sacrifices to ensure success in their new cement business. In 1984, a 16-year-old Malaysian boy is beheaded by a Chinese man, Kuala Lumpur, as a human sacrifice in an attempt to win the state lottery. The murder was in vain, so no one picked a winning number that week. 1987, a Chinese pig farmer, Chen Bohong of the Hosu, is about to slaughter a pig when he was rudely interrupted by a taxman who presents him with a bill. Irritated by the interruption, Chen kills the taxman, Sun Shaikong, instead. In 1989, a Liberal general, Gray Allison, is sentenced to death for murder of a policeman. He explains that he needed the policeman's blood to perform a magic rite to overthrow Liberia's dictator Samuel Doe. In 1993, a 36-year-old man from Peking, Ji Yunbao, admits to beating a 6-year-old schoolboy to death and leaving the child's severed head on the bus. Yunbao explains that he was annoyed at being passed over for a big promotion. In 1995, during the world's population conference held in Cairo, the Egyptian newspaper Al Wajad reports that the delegate has stabbed his wife to death because she refused to go to bed with him. In 1996, Francois Guiderion is shot dead by his wife because she could no longer tolerate his habitual flatulence. According to Miss Catherine Rionon, her husband, a 44-year-old French construction site manager, broke wind morning, noon, and night for 8 years. He took a pistol bullet in the chest from 35-year-old Catherine after farting in her face in bed. She told a Marseille judge, Gilbert Saint Jacques, I just snapped. And that is all for this chapter. We will convene soon where I read chapter 6, The Joy of Sex. That is SECTS, as in the joy of cults, not the joy of whatever, of being bedded. Sorry, that is the difference between sex as an SECT or SEX. Please do like, comment, subscribe. See you in the next one.